They brought her to the edge of the Ashwood on the morning of the first frost, while the pack still slept. No ceremony. 2 guards held her arms, and the High Steward stood behind them in his ceremonial sash, looking at her the way a man looks at a splinter he has finally removed. Dessa did not struggle. She had known this was coming the way you know a roof is failing, slowly, then all at once. She had spent 6 months cataloguing the signs, the seats that emptied beside her at the communal table, the tasks reassigned without explanation, the way younger Omegas had stopped meeting her eyes. Wolfless, the High Steward said. That was the only word he offered. Not exile, not ceremony, just the one word, which had always been the word they used for what she was, as though the absence of a wolf half made her not merely incomplete, but categorically false. She had heard it so many times that her body had developed a reflex. The flinch had stopped coming. She stood very still in the grip of the guards, her boots an inch from where the territory ended and the Ashwood began, and she noticed that the frost had turned all the grass silver, and she thought it was probably the most beautiful the valley had ever looked. The guards released her arms. She stepped across the line. She did not look back. She had 3 things: a cloak, the colour of old bark, a satchel of healer's supplies assembled over months, dried yarrow, a bone needle, 2 bandage cloths, and a small wooden figure of a running wolf that had belonged to her mother, in no longer than her middle finger. She had carried it so long the wood had worn smooth at the ears from the pressure of her thumb. The Ashwood closed around her by mid-morning. She was not afraid of it. The forest had no opinion of her. Whatever hunted in the dark between the trunks would assess her on strict evidence, her scent, her weight, her heartbeat, and not on the pack's conclusions. After years of being measured against an absence, she found this a kind of relief. She made camp by a stream just past the valley's shadow, and she was setting out her healer's tools when she heard the breathing, low and measured, the way old stone walls breathe in winter. She turned without standing. A wolf stood at the water's edge, 50 feet upstream. Black, with one white foreleg, ending at a paw larger than both her hands. It watched her with something she could not name, the patience she would eventually understand of a creature who has waited a very long time for something specific to arrive. She did not run. She lowered herself to sitting, cross-legged, very slowly. The wolf sat too. After a while she took out the bone needle and the first length of bandage cloth, and because her hands needed something to do, she began to wrap it and unwrap it. The wolf's ears turned forward. She wrapped it again. He came 3 steps closer, then 3 more. She kept breathing. By the time the light was fully gone from the sky, the wolf was close enough that she could see the old scar across his muzzle, a blade scar, straight and deliberate. She knew what that meant. She had been a healer's apprentice long enough to know a controlled wound from a fight wound. When he finally curled at the edge of her cloak, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat, she exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. She did not name him yet. You did not name something that was not yours. She lay down and watched the frost return to the grass around them, and thought, he came to me. He chose. Something that had been held tight and wrong inside her chest began, very slowly, to work itself loose. She was not aware yet that anyone was watching. Alpha King Malachi of the Ironstone Pack had not truly inhabited his great hall in 3 years. He stood at its windows and watched his pack without recognizing what he was watching. His court had learned to read his silences the way sailors read a sky. The long ones meant containment. The short ones meant thunder. And nobody had tried to close a distance with him in 18 months. They called it the sorrow in the kitchens, when no one of rank was listening. He had stood in the great hall before his entire court and dissolved a mate bond that had never been true, a political convenience that had calcified into habit, and the dissolution had cost him something he had not expected to pay. He had told himself, very carefully and consistently, that he did not feel it. This remained the thing he had most completely failed to believe. What the court did not know was that his wolf was diminishing, not dying. Diminishing, pulling back from the edges of him, contracting towards something too small and cold to function. He could still shift. He had verified this in private, in the forest beyond the keep. But the wolf that emerged was darker, quieter. It did not run. It moved through the Ashwood with the purposelessness of something looking for a thing it could no longer name. His advisor, Carew, had been direct. They are whispering about succession. A wolf that cannot lead its pack is not a king. Send out the selection call, find a mate, let the bond rebuild what is breaking. The selection had been announced the following morning. 42 Omegas presented to the court. He had stood in the great hall and looked at each one and felt nothing. The specific blankness of a man who has been running on reserves for so long, he has forgotten what full feels like. He sent them all home. What he had not announced was that he had been going into the forest every night for a month. No rank, no signet ring. Only the old leather coat that still smelled of the estate where he grew up. And walking until his wolf would come and walk alongside him. They had a truce. Not a union. A truce. On the night after the selection ended, they walked further east than usual, past the boundary stones, into the Ashwood proper. His wolf was restless in a way it had not been. Its attention kept snagging on something ahead, the way a horse's ears go forward before you see what the horse has already heard. Malachi followed. He came over a low ridge in the dark and stopped. Below, by a stream, a woman sat cross-legged on her cloak, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, the firelight catching the copper in it from the small camp flame she'd built. She worked a length of cloth with her hands, wrapping and unwrapping, and the rhythm was so deliberate he understood immediately. Her hands were giving her something to do, while she remained absolutely still. At the edge of her cloak, with its massive head on its forepaws, lay the largest wolf he had ever seen. It was watching the woman. It had made its judgment, and settled into it the way a stone settles into riverbed. His own wolf stood motionless beside him. That stillness, the absence of 3 years of restless contracting, was the first coherent thing his wolf had communicated to him in all that time. He went back to the keep. He told Carew to find out who had been cast out of the Ash Border territories in the past 2 days. The name came back by morning, Dessa. No clan name. The notation said simply, wolfless. He looked at that word for a long time. Then he sent a rider with a sealed instruction. No signature, no title. Just a location, a time, and come if you choose. She came. She arrived before midday, with the wolf beside her left knee, not leashed, not commanded, simply present as though he had always been there. She had the kind of beauty that was not immediately apparent, and then was suddenly impossible to look away from. Dark auburn hair, loose around her shoulders, copper red where the pale noonlight caught it, a face with strong cheekbones and a jaw set in the particular steadiness of someone who has learned to hold themselves very still under assessment. Her eyes were the dark amber of old resin, warm at their centre, careful at the edges. She was slender in the way of people who have been genuinely cold and not eaten well, but she stood without apology for any of it, which gave her the bearing of someone twice the rank she'd been assigned. The cloak was old bark brown and too large, as though borrowed from a taller life. She wore it as though it fit perfectly. The man who appeared had no title visibly displayed, but she was an archivist's apprentice. She read negative space. The quality of the leather, the way the guards at the tree line did not move unless he moved. She was not surprised when he gave his name. She had seen the portraits. Alpha King Malachi looked in person like someone had removed all the performance from the official image. What remained was a very tall man with dark hair going grey at the temples, jaw held under old tension, and eyes the colour of iron ore. Not cold, precisely, but the colour of cold. When he looked at the wolf for a long time, then at her. "That wolf is not from any pack," he said. "No. Where did you find it?" "I didn't. He found me." He considered this. She could not read his conclusions, but she could read the columns of his face, one showing what he chose to display, one tracking what it cost him to show only that. He was paying very close attention to her wolf. "Come to the keep," he said. "Why?" The word came without softening. He did not appear to find it offensive. He appeared, if she was reading him correctly, to find it refreshing in the specific way that something long denied becomes refreshing. "Because I have 42 Omegas who could not calm a single animal in my stables," he said, "and that wolf would have taken the arm off every member of my guard, and it is lying with its head against your knee." She was assigned a room in the east wing, oldest, least heated. She did not mention the cold. She used it. She knew the keep's warmest corridors within 2 days, which meant she knew its bones. She had always learned buildings the way she learned people, from the outside in, inferring the inner life from how it showed at the seams. The keep was full of absences. His table was set for 12 and eaten alone. The 11 empty places cleared, but never removed. The arrangement so consistent it had become a kind of ritual of endurance. Dust had settled on 6 of the 8 council chairs. In his study, an inkwell sat dried on a desk, strewn with correspondence dated months apart. Not neglect, but a man who only returns to correspondence when he has run out of other ways to occupy himself at an hour when ordinary life has gone to sleep. The great hall's dais held a chair that had worn grooves into the stone beneath it from long disuse. The tapestries showed hunting scenes with 2 figures in the lead, and someone, under careful instruction, had sewn a silver border very precisely over the right-hand figure, obscuring everything but the outline of a riding cloak. She looked at that tapestry a long time. She did not ask. She brought him daily reports on the wolf, written precise, in archival style. He read them and asked questions. The questions were intelligent and specific, and she answered honestly, which she suspected was not what he was accustomed to. The wolf had claimed the East Wing hearthrug. He allowed no one near it except Dessa. By the 5th day, he was also tolerating the approach of a very old hound who had belonged, she learned, to the previous lady of the keep. When she looked up from noting this, Malachi was watching her from across the room. The tension that lived in his jaw was, for this particular moment, somewhere else. She noticed. She stored it. She said nothing. The Lady Corinthia arrived on the 14th day, former alliance mate from the High Moor territories, her claim to the selection set aside 3 years ago, and managed since then with the precision of a woman who understood that timing was everything. Dessa recognized the type immediately. She had known this woman in 17 different forms, the person who uses courtesy's architecture so perfectly that cruelty arrives without raising its voice. Corinthia looked at Dessa the way you look at something that has tracked mud across a clean floor, once when no one of rank was watching, and then her expression returned to its pleasant neutral. The formal dinner was in the great hall, candelabra lit, the full court assembled. Dessa sat at the end of the secondary table, which was correct by rank and deliberate in its message. She ate methodically and kept track of the table's dynamics, who deferred to whom, who spoke before being addressed, who watched Malachi without appearing to watch him. Corinthia spoke across the table during the 3rd course, her voice pitched to carry precisely far enough. It is remarkable to grant an outcast a seat at one's table, almost as remarkable as the reason she was cast out. A pause. A wolfless Omega. I had not realized we were so short of company, that we were accepting defects. The table quieted. Dessa set down her spoon. She kept her face still. She thought of the wooden wolf in her pocket, worn smooth at the ears. "You were born defective," Corinthia added pleasantly, "and defects do not improve with relocation." Malachi's voice came from the head of the table. Quiet. The kind of quiet a room accommodates, rather than overcomes. "Lady Corinthia," a pause. "I was addressing my archivist. Anyone with further commentary on the character of members of this household is welcome to take it up with me directly. After dinner, in my study. Without their escort." The table did not resume normal volume for several minutes. Corinthia's expression did not change. Something behind her eyes made a fast, small recalculation. That night, the wolf was agitated. Dessa sat cross-legged on the floor, cross-legged at eye level, and began to hum. Not a song, exactly, but the sound she made when she was working through something difficult. Low and even. The wolf stopped pacing. He came to the hearthrug's edge and lay down facing her and pressed his enormous nose against her knee. She kept humming. The fire burned steadily. She did not know that the wall panel to the east wing study had been left 3 inches open. She did not know that Malachi had been sitting in his study unable to work, and that the humming had come through the gap, and that he had not moved since it started. The Corinthia came for her 2 days later in the courtyard before breakfast. Not alone. She had brought the High Steward from Ashwood, the same one, the same sash, and 2 of his men, and whatever legal documentation gives a man authority to collect a person designated as belonging nowhere. She was exiled from Ashwood territory, Corinthia told the gate guard, who was reading the documentation with the careful expression of a man placed in an impossible position. The exile stands. She must return to the Ashwood. Dessa was crossing the courtyard with a bundle of herbs from the kitchen garden. She stopped. The High Steward recognized her. He had the grace, or the cowardice, to look briefly at the ground. One of Corinthia's men caught her arm at the elbow, the same grip, and the cold of the cobblestones came up through her boot soles, and the air tasted of frost, and for one suspended moment she was back at the Ashwood edge, everything stripped to one word, and a step across a line. Then the wolf came through the archway at a dead run. He planted himself between her and the man, holding her arm, and made a sound not quite a growl, something lower, more absolute. A vibration that went into the stone of the courtyard and came back up through every person present's feet. The man released her arm. The High Steward stepped back. Corinthia did not step back, because she understood that stepping back was the end of something, but her face, for the first time since she'd arrived, was not entirely arranged. Malachi came through the same archway 30 seconds later. No coat. And he took in the arrangement, Dessa at the center, the wolf at her knee, the documentation in the High Steward's hands, Corinthia's expression, and was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet before thunder. "You came to my keep," he said to Corinthia, "invoked external legal authority over a member of my household, and arranged this without my knowledge or consent." A pause. "Your escort's horses will be ready within the hour." "The law," the High Steward began. "Supersedes you," Malachi said. "She is under my protection. Her status is mine to determine. Anyone who touches her answers to me." Corinthia left before the hour was up. Dessa stood in the courtyard until the gate closed, the wolf's side warm against her leg. While she was shaking slightly, the way she shook when danger had passed, and her body needed somewhere to put what it had been holding. She pressed her thumb against the wooden wolf in her pocket, worn smooth at the ears. 3 measured breaths. She went back inside. She had work to do. She found him 3 days later in the East Tower stairwell, alone, no candle, sitting on the 3rd step from the top. She had learned the geometry of this keep, which spaces were chosen and which were retreated into. She sat on the step below him. She did not ask if he was all right. She had known enough people in genuine difficulty to understand that question was always about the asker's comfort. She took out the bandage cloth and began to wrap and unwrap it. The humming came. "You know what I am," he said. An alpha king whose wolf is pulling away from him," she said. "Yes. My grandfather's grandfather bound the lineage," he said, after a silence. "He suppressed the bloodline to prevent it passing. The binding held 4 generations and came undone in me. My wolf is the part that came undone. It has been dying for 3 years because I made a decision that cost it something I didn't think it could feel, and I was wrong about what it could feel." She was quiet with this. Then he came to me. "Your wolf, in the forest, the night on the ridge. I know you were there." He went still for the first time. "You felt it." Silence. "He recognized something," she said. "He is not leaving. He is waiting. There is a difference," he said very quietly. "I have commanded armies. I have never been seen." She did not answer this directly, and she kept her hands moving. After a while she said, "You called me your archivist in the Great Hall. You are more useful than an archivist, but I needed a word the table would recognize." She had spent 2 weeks in the keep's archives, cross-referencing what she could find on broken lineage bindings. What she'd found, in a parchment sewn into a protective lining of newer sheepskin, was a description of the first binding, the real version, not the official history. The suppression of the bloodline had not been caution. It had been fear. The blood in that lineage could reach through the bond between a wolf and its human half, and restore what had been deliberately severed, but only if the one calling stood in their own truth, not performing, not managing, only if she was, completely, only herself. In the morning, there was a meal left at her door. Wrong tray, no livery. Something assembled by a person who had found what was available and made a decision. She ate it and thought, first gesture. He had made his first gesture. She would not name it for him. He would have to arrive at the name himself. She took him to the east tower window that looked over the Ashwood. In the pale afternoon light coming through the narrow slit, her hair was the colour of embers, and the set of her face, the composed, patient steadiness he had watched for 2 weeks, had finally come undone, not into distress, but into honesty. He thought, this is what she looks like when she is not managing anything. He stored it precisely. She said, I was told my whole life I was defective, not merely without a wolf, fundamentally wrong. I believed it. I spent 17 years believing it and organizing my entire existence around managing the effects. She looked at the forest. The night I crossed into the Ashwood, I stopped. Not because I decided to, because the trees had no opinion, and the wolf came without being asked, and something I had been holding in a very particular way for 17 years just released. He was watching her. She could feel it without turning. The binding on your bloodline needs someone to stand before it in their whole truth, she said. Not a candidate, the real thing. I think that might be me. I think the wolf in the forest knew it before either of us did, but it only works if I'm not performing it. I am telling you this because I am not performing anything right now. He looked at her for a long time. I have been choosing to be unreadable for so long, I no longer remember what I meant to protect by doing it, he said. She left because I was unreadable. I dissolved the bond because I had stopped being able to tell whether she had ever seen me at all, and I was right that I was unseen, and being right about that was its own kind of damage. Yes, she said, you give people your complete attention without asking them to perform for it. You just look, with actual interest. I have been watching you do it for 2 weeks, and I believe what you are doing is simply being honest about what you care about. He stopped. The wolf in the forest came to you and lay down at your knee. My wolf. The part of me sealed since my grandfather's grandfather tried to prevent it becoming what it is. It found you before I found you. His voice quieted. It was never about the wolf. It was always about me. The confession cost him. She could see exactly how much, the effort of staying present rather than retreating into the architecture of distance. She honored that cost by not looking away. She took the wooden wolf from her pocket, smooth at the ears, worn dark at the base. She held it a moment. Her mother's hands, 17 years of exile, the morning of frost, the High Steward's one word, and set it on the window ledge between them, facing the forest. "He came to me," she said, "and I chose to stay." She pressed her palm flat against the stone, and she thought of nothing she was owed, and nothing she was managing, and no version of herself that needed protecting, and something that had been cold for a very long time at the center of her chest opened. Not dramatically, the way a hand opens when it has been holding something too long, and the holding is finally done. Outside, in the Ashwood, the great black wolf raised its head. Inside the keep, she heard, not with her ears, but in the space between her ribs where the wound had been, a sound like iron in a fire, something that had been hard and cold beginning to change its nature. He made a sound she had no word for, not a word. A breath held for 3 years, finally letting go. He went to one knee on the cold stone, not for the court, not for any witness, just down. The most powerful man alive on his knees in front of a woman the pack had called defective and left in the Ashwood. His face was entirely open. What she saw there was not a king. It was a person, finally stopped running from the knowledge that he needed to be known. "You are not defective," he said. "You are the fullest soul I have ever known." She placed her hand on the side of his face. He closed his eyes. Outside, the great black wolf stood, stretched, and walked to the edge of the stream. He drank, which he had not done without prompting in 3 years. The 2 healings were not separate events. They were the same event expressed in 2 bodies, the way they had always been. Then he turned toward the keep and made the low vibration that was not a growl, the sound that went into stone. But this time it was not a warning. The old hound in the east wing heard it from 4 floors away and lifted his head and wagged his tail once, slowly, in the way of old dogs who have been waiting a long time for a house to feel like itself again. The council was still in session when they came back downstairs. A Malachi stood with her in the doorway. "The selection is closed," he said. "We will speak of succession no further." Later, in the study, the wolf on the hearthrug, fire lit, the old hound asleep against the door, she said, "What happens to Corinthia?" "Whatever you think is right," he said. He meant it. Expulsion from selection rights. She returns to Highmore. She keeps her life. A pause. She acted from fear. I understand what that feels like. She doesn't get to harm anyone else from it, but she gets to live, and I will not be the thing she lost her life to. He looked at her for a long time. He said nothing. He did not need to. She reached across and picked up the wooden wolf from where she had placed it on the study windowsill, still facing out, the way she had set it after the tower, facing the forest. She turned it in her hands. She set it back down, facing inward, toward the room, toward the fire, toward him, a small change, a chosen one. He watched her do it. He said nothing. He understood.